Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Okay, so first, on behalf of the Secretary of the Navy, the Honorable Richard Spencer, our Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Richardson, and our Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Neller, I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for coming to today's event. So earlier I was talking to some of our folks, and actually about nearly 20 years ago, the Department of the Navy began a journey to divest ourselves of military housing that we were running. And we turned to you, industry, for advice on how we would change our operations, divest of our inventory, and develop some business agreements. We learned a great deal over time. We're still learning. We've had some great benefits for the United States Navy in terms of readiness. We have benefits to our service members, and we've had benefits, of course, to our family. Well, today, we're here to start a new journey, a different journey, but somewhat similar in looking at exploring opportunities in our lodging operations for the Department of Navy, both on Navy installations and our Marine Corps installations. And so today is the first day of our dialogue, our first day to exchange information. The Army has taken on this adventure, okay? They've actually have privatized, and we hope to learn, take some lessons learned from them and apply them to our journey as we move forward. The agenda that we've set is really to provide you some insights of our lodging operations, our inventories, our conditions, and to make sure that we receive feedback from you to sort of see how we can sort of adjust our plan. Our next steps will be determined on today's dialogue and the feedback that we receive from you. Now, no military conversation would be complete without some acronyms. Right? We just do not operate without throwing in a few acronyms. It's sort of the way we operate. And so what I would like to do is set this framework and shed a spotlight on some of the acronyms you're going to hear today and sort of allow it to be put in some context for you. And so the first one that I'll start off with is the term NAVFAC. Okay? The Naval Facilities Engineering Command. That's the organization that I have the privilege of leading. And our job really is to set the conditions, to serve as the government's representatives, to sort of formulate any business agreements. And we're the organization that you'll have a lot of dialogue with, and the representatives here at today's panel discussions are mainly representatives from NAVFAC. However, the key people that I really want to make sure we focus on, and you have an appreciation of the individuals and the organizations that run these operations. I'll start with the Navy, and that's CNIC. CNIC is something you'll hear. The commander of CNIC is Admiral Mary Jackson, who's sitting up here, and you'll see her today. And I encourage all of you to sort of approach them if you have specific questions or if you want to have some dialogue or introduce yourselves. But Admiral Jackson is actually the owner of a lot of the inns on all the Navy installations, the Gateway Inns and Suites. Her staff, her organization manages the assets. They have the insights on some of the restrictions or some of the challenges. They understand their inventory, their business, their occupancies. And so they are the customer. They are the stakeholders in the property that we'll be discussing today. On the Marine Corps side is MCICOM. The Marine Corps Installations Command. And that organization is led by Major General Vinny Consolidation. And he is right there, he's our Marine rep here. And he has oversight similar to Admiral Jackson on managing and owning the property and running the operations throughout the Marine Corps installations, 24 installations. And then another entity that we have, and we just maybe like to confuse things, we have an entity called NEXCOM, Navy Exchange Command. And that organization is actually headed up by a CEO, a government employee, a senior executive, who happens to be a retired Rear Admiral, Robert Bianchi, and he's the gentleman up here. and he owns all the Navy lodging. So those three major entities, I think, are very important when you hear NextCom, CNIC, MCICom, and NAFAC is the other entity. Okay, so hopefully that has some context. But they're all unique. They all are operated in some different fashion. But again, this is the opportunity to start exploring it, and hopefully you'll get a better appreciation of those sectors within our inventory. The next organization I want to make sure that you have an appreciation for is our Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Energy, Installations, and Environment. Okay, EIE. Our ASN is here today, Mr. Todd Mellon, and he'll be speaking with us here shortly. And so he actually controls the policies of our business agreements and our real estate activities. And then he'll shed some information to you today. And then also Mr. Balaki, who actually is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy, DAZN, for estate installations and facilities. And so he'll be here today as well. I share this all with you, so again, just for you to have an understanding. It is something that's very complex. I think it's important that you have a good appreciation for the different entities that we have within our Department of the Navy. Again, I want to thank everyone for being here. I would encourage you to be proactive, to ask questions, and again, based on what we've received today, it will sort of adjust and will modify our course ahead on what we need to do in the future. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce to you today our Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Energy, or for Environment Installations and Energy Installations and Environment, Mr. Todd Mellon. Sir, thank you very much for being here.
So, first of all, I want to thank everybody who've traveled in, those that are local. It's a big crowd. That's a good thing from my perspective. The amount of attention we're getting, you can go ahead and go to the next chart because I'm going to bounce around this a little bit, associated with lodging privatization. The Navy, Department of the Navy, is focused right now on making sure we're leveraging every dollar we get from the taxpayers to focus on the mission of delivering lethality for the Department of the Navy, so both Navy and Marine Corps. And we're trying to align all of those activities and ensure we're focused on the term everybody's throwing around right now is core versus non-core. So what's core to our Navy mission? What's core to our Marine Corps mission? And what we're finding as we go through that is, and you heard Admiral Porca describe his organization. He described Admiral Jackson's organization. He described General Colonnese's organization. He described Navy Exchange's organization. This is only a portion of their portfolio. They're responsible for other quality of life attributes for sailors and Marines. And so the Navy is going through a very deliberate process to assess and understand where there's opportunity to partner with private industry, to divest of things we shouldn't be doing in order to maximize every dollar we get from the taxpayers to deliver on the Department of the Navy's mission. So when we talk about core and non-core, it's not a matter of whether it's important, and it's not a matter of whether it's not important to our sailors and Marines. The quality of the lodging we provide for our sailors, Marines, civil service, and contractors is extremely important to the Navy. It's extremely important to the Marine Corps. We're learning some hard lessons as we go through some issues related to housing. I'd be surprised if you haven't seen it, read it, or heard about it in the press, or watched it on Capitol Hill. And there are issues. And there are people fundamentally questioning, why are you taking on privatizing lodging at the same time you're struggling with privatized housing? From my perspective, this is the best time to have this dialogue. We understand where we had lost sight of where we needed to be from a housing perspective. So I think this is the perfect opportunity to have this discussion as it relates to lodging. Lodging is extremely important to our Navy and Marine Corps mission. Everybody thinks San Diego's easy. We were just having a conversation. There's lots of hotels in San Diego. Yeah, there are. They're not always the most convenient hotels for our sailors and Marines that might be training on base at Coronado or might be training at Point Loma or somewhere else, and they don't have a car. They don't have the ability to be off base and do all the things they need to do. But they need temporary housing for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks while they're in training. They need the ability to be able to stay in a quality place and have the amenities that they're entitled to. So that's what we're trying to do when we talk about exiting non-core. We're exiting non-core in terms of the function of managing lodging, not exiting the core function of taking care of our sailors and Marines. So I want to make sure it's crystal clear that we are not at all walking away from our responsibility as it relates to our sailors, Marines, and civilians. That is a core function, and we're learning that and relearning it through what we're going through from a housing perspective. So for you, I just want to make sure we're going into this eyes wide open. That is going to be a core as we have this dialogue about the non-core function of managing lodging and executing lodging in support of our mission. So as we go through, it's a big portfolio. It's a large portfolio. And I know Scott and others are going to come up and talk at a level of detail. I think actually Jim Balaki is going to step you through the portfolio we're talking about and the breadth of where it is, what it is, how many, and the gamut that they look like. I think we've got everything from about 50 years old to less than 10 years old. But we want to get them all, as we move around, to a private market standard. What should the minimum standard be for Navy and Marine Corps lodging? We want to enter into that dialogue with you as we head down this path. And we'll establish what that minimum standard is. What we learned in some of our pitfalls associated with housing was we just assumed the private standard applied to every home. And it didn't necessarily apply to every home. So there's going to be a discussion about the inventory and what happens with the inventory. I think the Marine Corps probably has some of the biggest challenges when it comes to lodging and what the condition of some of those lodges and facilities are. And there's a dialogue to be had associated with what, from a private market perspective, your assessment of in those areas for the mission we need to accomplish, the role of lodging in accomplishing that mission, what the best approach to do that is. We've got ideas and we've got thoughts about how to approach that. I'm not going to sit here and say we've got it exactly right, because we don't know what you know. You've got a different view of the marketplace in different regions and different areas than we have. But we want to have that discussion based on the marketplace and the market basket of Department of Defense lodging requirements by region, by town, by city, by base, and for what purpose. And that's what this dialogue is starting today. It's to talk about why we want to look at private market standards as it applies to sailors, Marines, civilians, and contractors accomplishing the Navy mission. And it's a dialogue. We want to eliminate or reduce the renovation backlog. Admiral Korka talked about acronyms. It's not just acronyms, it's the bureaucracy of the federal government. And it's a bureaucracy on purpose. It's intended to be structured so there are checks and balances in the system. That bureaucracy, as it relates to, in this case, lodging, precludes us or makes it extremely difficult to leverage the resources that we generate associated with lodging in our current construct to improve and renovate our lodging. There's a totally different process associated with what you want to do with a building or facility than the revenue you generate associated with that building or facility, associated with somebody going on temporary duty and paying for lodging for them. So there are business efficiencies from a private sector that we believe we can leverage in eliminating and or reducing that renovation backlog to bring us up to that private market standard I was talking about before. So the idea from our perspective is better lodging over time to a commercial private market standard that meets the Navy and Marine Corps mission of supporting our people. That's what we're trying to get at. And oh, by the way, in the process, we want it to be self-sustaining based on that revenue stream. And we believe, based on all of the analysis Scott and Admiral Porter's team have done, it's actually going to save the Department of the Navy money in the long haul. So from our perspective, this is a win. I think it can be a win for the Department of the Navy. I think it can be a win for the private sector. I think it's going to open an avenue and a market base that you don't have today. And I think it provides an opportunity for you to contribute from a private sector perspective, to put your name on your contribution to improving the quality of life for our sailors and Marines. So think about that from a commercial perspective, from a private marketing perspective, and your ability to be able to identify yourself with improving the quality of life of the sailors and Marines. And the value that brings, not just to you personally or you professional, but the value it potentially brings to you from a business perspective. That's the dialogue we want to have. But it's an all-encompassing dialogue. We're not going to give up on any one of the tenets I talked about. But it's got to be an open and fair dialogue. And it's got to be balanced. And it needs to be one that makes sense from a business perspective, as well as makes sense from a government perspective. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the rest of the group. We got a lot more to do today, and you don't want to sit here and listen to me all day. So thank you.
Thanks, sir. Well, I've been asked to, I don't think I've seen this many suits outside of Washington, D.C. That's great. Thanks for all making the trip. This is really, really important to the Department of the Navy, Navy, Marine Corps, Marines and sailors and their families, right, who make up our force and volunteer every day to provide the blanket of freedom that we get to live under. What an amazing force we have. I'm going to shift first. If you'll go to slide 13 first, I'd like to start there. We'll come back to this. But I just wanted to show you sort of where we're talking about, first and foremost. The Navy and the Marine Corps have lodging across the nation, and frankly in Hawaii and Guam as well. It serves the purpose of meeting the needs of our traveling force. So they travel for a number of reasons, but they travel to these locations for short-term stays, a few days, up to long-term stays, 6 months or even longer in some cases. Sometimes they're individual travelers, and sometimes they're families with kids in tow between duty stations. Makes the meeting the needs of those particular customers as clients much different in terms of the offerings that we're going to be looking for and asking you to factor in as we go forward. So this is where we are. We've excluded, and I think I can go there, we've excluded the overseas locations, so we're only dealing with those in the continental United States, Guam and Hawaii. And these are where we're located. Kind of nice locations if you look at it, right? Coastal areas. The neat thing about that is generally higher per diem rates for our travelers, which helps us, I think, in some instances, generate the kinds of capitalization that we need. Now, if you go back to the original slide, we'll come back to this as a closing slide. Thanks. Why do we have lodging at all? I mean, as we've described, not a core function. Many years ago, obviously, when Navy bases and Marine Corps bases, and some still are, frankly, located in the boondocks where there weren't a lot of lodges, we still needed to travel. Sailors and Marines still needed to train. They still needed to learn about the equipment, bring their formations together to gain confidence and what they had to do as a team to fight and win the nation's wars. And so putting travelers up in a temporary status was essential as a part of the Navy's and Marine Corps' missions. Those haven't changed. Those requirements are fundamentally the same today as they have been over the century. But why do we need them on installations, you might ask? One, obviously for remote locations, but an area like San Diego, as Secretary Mellon described, we've got young sailors, young Marines on their first duty station. Think about this. How many of you have teenagers, right? A few of you, right? Just think about that 18-year-old on his first plane ride out somewhere, and now can he rent a car? Maybe not, right? He's going to get picked up by a bus at an airport. Maybe it's a training course to polish his skills on how to navigate a submarine. He'll go over here to Point Loma and be housed, and then attend a classroom training for a week or so, and then be bused back to the airport. He or she is going to have to walk or be bused to where they need to go for that training. That's fundamentally a little bit different than you see in your operating environments generally across the commercial sector. They provide safe and secure ways for our travelers to attend those kinds of trainings or to be accessible to commanders. And this is really about commanders being able to understand, right, that their sailors and Marines are safe. If you go to the next slide. Now, we describe or categorize travelers in a number of categories. And again, we're acronym soup here. We've tried to describe some of them. And I've kind of given a little bit of a hint about this, but these are the fundamental types of travelers that are coming to Navy and Marine Corps lodging facilities. The first, the temporary duty, the training traveler, somebody who's got some sort of an official capacity. I am here on temporary travel today. I stayed in an NGIS lodge, Capitol Jackson on Point Loma, great facility. That's what we do. We travel, we'll stay, and I'll be gone in 2 days. So a 2-day stay, much like a commercial traveler anywhere across the world. Next, we have these limited service travelers, and these are folks that are generally preparing to go on a deployment. They'll come, for example, I've seen folks that will work up with a piece of equipment that they're unfamiliar with. They'll bring the team in for a period of days to work together as a team to go and gain proficiency on that equipment. They'll stay for weeks or even months to prepare themselves to operate that equipment proficiently in the operating environment of the Pacific and the Atlantic. Next, temporary duty under instruction. These are folks that are traveling for up to 179 days, again, long-term, typically training as well. Then my favorite, the permanent change of station. These are the lost families that we give orders to, right, each and every summer. The challenge here is about 80%, I think that's about right, about 80% of our travel in this category comes in the summer months, so it's just getting ready to start right now. Right, so families will come in tow, they have different needs, obviously, they'll stay until they can find a house or an apartment to live in or granted access to on-base quarters. And so they have much different needs for being able to care for young children or even teens and as they're doing their house hunting and school finding. And then last, leisure travelers. And these are folks that we generally grant on a space available basis. Will come into a great place like San Diego or Naval Air Station, Pensacola to enjoy some of the great weather and the beaches and the facilities there. So we accommodate those folks. Next slide, please. So we've categorized the lodging into the ownership venues here. The first, obviously, the blue on the left represents the Navy's. And this actually represents the bulk of the rooms within those nearly 22,000 rooms across the portfolio. These two categories generally address a different kind of traveler. And you can see from the slides, if you can see them, that one, the furthest, the NGIS, typically will handle the traveler that's more like what you're used to, the commercial 1 to 2 to a week, whereas the Navy Lodge will be looking at the permanent change of station, that family that's moving from station to station. As we move over to the Marine Corps, very similar as well. The Marine Corps temporary duty assignment, lodging facilities, and then lastly, the Marine Incident Corps. Next slide, please. So this is the portfolio. Navy Gateway Inns and Suites represents the largest portion of the Navy's portfolio. 50%, nearly over 50% of the rooms in this portfolio are in 3 locations. About a quarter of it right here in California, and 30% split between Virginia and Florida. The occupancy in this is about 58%, or has been over the last 3 years. And this targets generally those short-term, short-duration travelers up to 180 days. Next slide, please. The Navy lodges. These obviously, again, target the longer-term, longer duration, and larger group-type stays. It represents about 2,600 rooms in the same locations. And about 28% of the Navy lodge inventory, almost 30%, is here in the state of California. And an additional 28% is in Florida and Virginia. So you can see it's concentrated in those areas. There's one uniqueness about the Navy lodge, and that is that a quarter of those assets, of the 40 buildings in this inventory, a quarter of them are actually located off of a military installation, so they're in the communities. Next slide, please. The ends of the Corey, okay, changed colors here, so I was expecting red. Okay. Sorry, Marine Corps, we'll have to fix this the next time we present this.
Stop the bridge.
Shame. This represents about 886 rooms, has a 72% occupancy over the last several years, and about nearly half of the inventory of the Inns of the Corps are located here in California. Sorry, flying yesterday. An additional 32%, so nearly 70% are located in those same 3 states again. Next slide, please. And the Marine Corps TDY. Again, you can see the numbers here, about 2,500 rooms, about 60% occupancy over the last 3 years, and about 41% of that inventory is here in the state of California. Next slide, please. So here is the summary. I'll leave this up for a little bit if you want to copy some of these numbers down. I imagine these slides will be made available, Scott, is that true? So you don't have to if you don't want to, but this is the information that represents the universe of what we're discussing today. And I'll just pause there. We're averaging about 62% occupancy over the totality of the portfolio. We believe that this occupancy can be increased through creative use of the assets, right-sizing the room counts in specific locations. And finally, the final slide, the one that I started with, again, this shows the locations of our lodges. I'm going to stop there. We've got plenty of experts here for questions at the point where we get to that, and I'll turn it over next to Mr. Pools. Thanks all.
Good morning. Am I too loud or too soft? My ears are plugged. Sorry about that. I thought I was coming here to talk about my career at University of Kentucky as a center and my MBA, and I was figured out we're talking about lodging privatization, so I'll switch gears. Before I launch, let me talk about what this is about and what it's not about. It is about sailors, Marines, and their families having lodging accommodations that meet their needs so they can perform the mission that enables all of us to sleep better. And we have to absolutely stay focused on that. That's what we're here for. It isn't about government people not doing good with lodging privatization. We have a lot of outstanding professionals at all 4 of those organizations and beyond that own and operate lodging for Navy and Marine Corps. We've faced with much different challenges and different rule sets, policies, laws in government ownership and operations. So, as Admiral Porco mentioned, we are on a journey. There is some significance of this room on that journey. MHPAEA, we actually launched our family housing, our regional project. The first one was launched in this room back in late 90s, closed in '01. Unaccompanied housing that was completed under the MHPAEA was actually launched in this room, San Diego. So we've got about 62,000 homes under MHPAEA for families, Navy, Marine Corps families. About a little over 6,000 beds for mostly sailors, unaccompanied, both in San Diego and Hampton Roads. And then a few other things that are closely related to what I call innovative transformational authorities. One of our biggest enhanced use leases and use of special authority was actually launched a couple rooms over, and that's right here in town, the Broadway complex. The last really 8 blocks in downtown San Diego that are being developed. So a lot of first offs here, and good here to be here to continue this journey. Thanks all of you for being here, for being interested in this. It is a good opportunity to expand the diversity of your portfolios, regardless of what segment that you're in. Privatization, whether family, unaccompanied, or lodging, hopefully in the future as we continue on this path, offers diversity that you probably don't have today. There may be demand in this portfolio when your private demand, your private portfolio doesn't have the same. But a lot of differences there. So, what is MHPAEA? Military Housing Privatization Initiative. It's a kit of authorities that Congress gave us to work with the private sector, government to work with the private sector, particularly in market sectors that are well established. In MHPAEA, we're really not inventing a new model. We're taking advantage of a model that exists, rental housing model, the apartment rental housing model, and the hotel industry. MHPAEA came about in 1996. Took us a few years to get started. All the services utilized it for their family housing portfolio. Still learning some lessons there, making some improvements, and we'll incorporate them as we go forward in other privatization areas. The privatization has a whole, I call it a toolkit, has a whole host of authorities from investments, conveyances of land, improvements, housing via lease or title, establishment of partnerships. We've used it for limited liability companies, limited partnerships, and much of our portfolio that we've executed under MHPAEA. It also has some authorities that we don't use often. It has loan authorities for the government to be a lender to the private sector. We've used that sparingly, and the Department of Navy do not intend to use it going forward. It also provides the ability to make lots of guarantees. You will find that I am severely allergic to any type of government guarantee. I break out in hives when anyone even mentions them. We've had a couple of programs over the years that had guarantees. They may sound really attractive. They lead to really bad habits. And they're also very expensive with OMB. Don't expect those to come into play here. In 03, the MHPAEA was expanded to include transient housing. The only project that's pure transient housing that's been executed is the Army's PAL program, and Mark's here somewhere. Where are you at, Mark? Another good person to chat with. Mark was in on the day one with the Army, private sector consultant that does the Army MHPAEA work. He was in on day one and has a good perspective. We're actually tapping him quite often as we continue on this journey. So, next slide. Basis for the PPP. Obviously, government and the private sector, you will find that our big role here will be providing land, buildings, improvements via ground lease. And it'll be via ground lease, regardless if the ground lease is the main entity that we set up, or whether we go with a limited liability company or limited partnership. And then, of course, the private sector, for your knowledge and your expertise, whether it be the owner developer that's in a relationship with the Department of Navy, hoteliers, the financial organizations, everything else that goes in to make these work. Capital, debt, and equity, that makes the initial development period work, and there is going to be a significant initial development on a DoN lodging privatization. The other thing that DoN provides is, based on history, a pretty good demand coming in for the housing, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And then, of course, guest revenue that makes everything work. And I don't view that as government appropriations. That's guest revenue coming in and staying at the hotel and paying nightly rates. Next slide, please. What does DoN bring? As Mr. Belarkey mentioned, we've got 59 installations throughout Conus, Hawaii, and Guam that have lodging on it. Not sure how many phases we may break down DoN lodging privatization in. If we pursue it, we'll be interested in your thoughts. It's one of the questions in your RFI. How would you like to see it broken down? Why is it beneficial to you? Why is it beneficial to us? There's a total of 591 hotel buildings across those 21,000 rooms, 59 installations. Probably lots of opportunity to break down some of those buildings and not have so many. Some or a portion of this will be in our DoN lodging thoughts as we go forward, put the concept brief together and so forth. I mentioned guarantees that I'm allergic to. That's something that you can count on us not bringing, is any type of guarantees. However, based on history, and I think in your package, hopefully everyone's got a package, the fact book, and I think we went back at least 3 years. I'm sure when we get the RFP, we'll provide additional information on history. And the history looks pretty good in regards to the demand. I don't think that there will be guarantees needed. And we managed to get through family housing privatization finance, unaccompanied housing finance, without a need for any kind of type of guarantees across the Department of Navy. I think the same will be true here. Next slide. Private sector. I think the biggest thing here that I'm very interested in is a brand standard. We've had a lot of discussion already about the importance of branding, the value of branding. Quite frankly, I'd like to have branding on some of our family housing and unaccompanied over the years. I think it's a good opportunity. It would be nice to know that wherever you're staying on base or off base lodging for the Department of Navy, lodging privatization, that it has a brand, it has a sign on it, and you know what to expect because you've stayed at that before. How do we describe that standard that we're looking for? I think we're still in the phase of when we see it, we'll know it. We've got a little bit more work as we get through concept development to describe to you what we're looking for. Right now we define it as a mid-scale limited service extended stay. That's pretty broad. You can have really good or really bad from that probably. We are looking to raise the standard level that we have now. The good thing about San Diego is we have some good, bad, and ugly in San Diego lodging privatization. Hopefully we have the 4 locations we're going to today is representative of that. I'm betting the ugly is not real ugly. We do have some fairly ugly, right, General? Some that we just need to tear down and replace or get out of the business in that location. The funding for these deals. We really want to look for a balance, the right balance in regards to debt and equity. It's good for folks to have skin in the game. We're always interested in that. We also recognize that equity can be very expensive and can come with controls that maybe don't align completely with what we're trying to do for the sailors and Marines, their families as they're on travel. So making sure that we don't over leverage. We've already done a lot of modeling. You'll see from the RFI the questions that we have in there, and hopefully you can throw them out today in the Q&A session. We don't believe that we will have to be in an over leveraged situation. This can be and will be a pretty big deal. It'll be very attractive to a lot of folks. So the last thing we want to be is in an over leveraged situation where in the first 5 to 10 years we're wondering if we're going to make it. Or in the last 20 years of 50-year deal, we're wondering if we really got the appropriate amount of money in this thing to sustain it. We will be looking for a self-sustained project, a project that can be stood up, executed, and then not have any requirements for appropriated funds over time. Appropriated or not appropriated. I think all of you know that a lot of this lodging is not appropriated fund operated now. We don't want to have to supplement once we stand up. Don't believe we'll have to have a equity investment from the government up front. We're not anticipating that right now. But to stand it up and have the project stand on its revenue, hopefully the income stream will be able to sustain that level of quality that we go in for that entire 50 years. Next slide. So we talked about the potential guest. Jim hit, Mr. Blocky hit just a little bit who they are, the Navy and Marine Corps service members. I think really civilian second. It's intended for the folks in military first, civilian second. It's kind of the way it works. Now we will eventually be putting together waterfall tenants for both the stuff that's on base behind the fence line and the stuff that's outside the fence line. We do have some lodging that's outside the fence line today. And then those on PCS, TDY, TDI, I always call it TDI, I think it's temporary duty under, what's the I? Instruction, which is folks basically getting orders to somewhere else, but along the way they got to stop for training. So I call it temporary duty and route. It's close enough for me. The unofficial travelers, the retirees, the DoD leisure travelers, guests and families, if you recall that slide 13 that Mr. Blocky had, where we're at. Not only great locations for the Navy and the Marine Corps, the maritime mission that we perform from the shore, but it's an excellent location to go on your leisure. So very, very attractive. Retirees wanting to come back and stay and so forth. We will have waterfall of tenants, who gets first preference and who you get a backfill with as you run down that list. Obviously those folks come after the folks that are active duty with performing the mission today. When you look at that chart on the right, you see over 4 million occupied room nights with official travelers, 800,000 by unofficial. There's a whole lot of other folks, and we're still pulling data, but it looks like we've got about 1.7 million room nights that are not staying in our lodging, even though we have a 62% occupancy, basically, I think it is. We've got a whole lot of folks that we're not taking advantage of. I believe that's an area that can be beneficial to us in the future. That with private sector, with branding, that you will have access to additional people that you can bring into our lodging. And a benefit to you, if you're a hotelier, is where you're bringing them into the remainder of your portfolio. I think that's an excellent opportunity for the private sector that we can take advantage of here as a win-win. Next slide, please. Average daily rate. Average daily rate, the per diem, the lodging per diem, is a portion of when I'm on travel or military is on travel. It's basically broken down how much is lodging, how much is meals, and they pay directs on travel for the getting there, airplane, traveling around, rental car, what have you. The lodging per diem is developed by GSA. is dictated to us. It tracks industry. They have a method which they survey. They put out the rate by location, and that's the maximum that folks can get when they're on travel, staying and lodging. We're looking at 75% of that lodging per diem rate as the maximum that we would utilize for the lodging under privatization. Over time, it would increase with inflation. Works very well in our other market segments, just like private sector. You have down years, and just like private sector, you have up years. But one of the very interesting things is when your pure private market in lodging may be down because of the economy or whatever, the exact opposite may be true for your military demand. It probably didn't drop off, and it may even be increased depending on what's going on in the world. So one of the benefits of diversity of adding this to your portfolio. You can see the numbers there. These are 2019 numbers across the entire portfolio, and very significantly, I think in your fact book we did list it out either by region or installation averages, what the 2019 per diem is, and then what 75% of that is. You can see across the portfolio $136 and $102. Obviously, not paying for the same things that your pure private portfolio is paying for with land costs and so forth. Working with private sector, next slide please. Consolidating the portfolio, you've heard some of the other speakers talk about, we really have 4 owners, operators of lodging across the Navy and Marine Corps, 2 Navy, 2 Marine Corps. In the past, we really had 1 non-appropriated, 1 appropriated, that was being shifted to all non-appropriated. With the lodging privatization, if we're successful with this, we pursue it, we would intend for there to be a single lodging operator at every installation that we have. And hopefully that will be a privatization. But we don't intend to have dual in the future. I don't think that's the intent, regardless of how things play out in the future. Right sizing the portfolio, you know from the fact book, it varies a little bit, but average we're 62% occupancy across the portfolio. We've taken a look at where the peaks are, what months, how that works. We believe that there's definitely opportunity to right size the portfolio. Figuring out where that needs to occur is something that we're very interested in discussions with the private sector and how they view that. It will be something you'll hear me talk a lot about. Where will the Department of Navy, where will we want to keep basically the trump card? And so as we go through RFP, you will see us wanting to have the final say on the scope, how many, where at. There will be minimum standards that the Navy and Marine Corps have, perhaps because of the location near the training, the cost if we move that lodging somewhere else, of increased cost now that we have for rental cars, time lost for the people being trained, etc. There may be locations wherein we want to say, hey, I got it in your pure private portfolio. You may not need to leave a lodge in that location, just purely driven by economics. But we're not here just driven by economics. We do have a mission to meet with our military. But we are very interested in your perspective. You're those experts. And so working together, I think we can say, hey, here's where we need some stuff. It may not be good economics. How do we best make that work in this portfolio going forward? I think there'll be some locations where the best decision is to knock down, not replace, and depend on the lodging that's outside the gate. Walking through and figuring out where those are. There's probably opportunities to walk away from some lodging that is not in bad shape And it may be that the Navy and Marine Corps will be interested in picking that up for unaccompanied housing, or what you're familiar with, barracks, if you will. So lots of different things that are open for discussion as we go forward. I'm convinced that private sector can facilitate higher occupancy. The branding in itself, I think, is going to play very well on that. That you will have an opportunity to capture additional demand, and that you will be able to do so. That we will be able to get reduced renovation costs, and we'll get operating efficiencies. And this is not about government people not being very good at what they do. This is about the rule set being different. And we've seen it time and time again with privatization. There is a different rule set there, different things coming into play. And then we have folks who have millions where we have tens of thousands. Obviously beneficial. And I mentioned before the additional demand, not only good for our DoN lodging privatization, but can be an excellent benefit to your portfolio wide. Next slide, please. How's the PPV created? I'm going to talk about two things. I'm going to you hear talking about partnerships all the time. We call it partnerships for the most part on the family housing, unaccompanied. Pretty much everything is either a limited partnership or a limited liability company. They're true partnerships. We are a partner with the private sector. The other is just a ground lease, and with the limited liability company or limited partners, you also have a ground lease. But there is a chance that we will just have a ground lease, and really all those government controls and so forth will be incorporated in that ground lease. So I'm going to show you both. There'll be a lot of discussion over the summer as we put the concept brief together and try to get to a stage, stop where we're at the Hill, giving them a notification, coming back to you with an RFQ, RFP. There'll be a lot of discussion with OMB in regards to what structure we utilize. The LLC structure, we'll go to the next slide. Really, Department of Navy coming in, contributing land via ground lease, conveying improvements. You'll see in all these that we are going to convey, when we do a privatization, we will convey improvements to the private sector. We will not own them in the future. The private partner coming in will establish a limited liability company that we'll become a member of. They'll secure debt, contribute equity, bring that into the partnership. They will serve as the managing member under a limited liability company if it's a limited partnership, a general partner. And the Navy will have a member role in a limited liability company, or a limited partner role in a limited partnership. Like other limited liability companies, limited partnerships, as a major member or general limited partner, will have interest and will capture those in the operating agreement or limited partnership agreement. Either way, whether it's just a lease establishing this or an operating agreement, general partnership agreement, really that entity that's set up is really financing, designing, constructing, operating, owning, maintaining, sustaining, demo, everything that needs to be done to those units. So this is not a relationship where the government's going contracting in the future after we privatize. Where you have a lease relationship and or a partnership relationship. In most cases, probably with an owner-operator. That owner-operator's got contracts with all the major entities that perform the work on the assets. I hit a little bit on that on the next slide. Ground lease. Very similar to the limited liability company. We basically pull everything that's in the operating agreement into the lease, if you will. Next slide, please. Typical deal points. A lot of these come from our lessons learned on family housing and unaccompanied housing. We're exploring now what's different on lodging, what do we need more of, less of, what's totally different that we need to anticipate and include as major decisions for the DoN. Obviously, refinancing, taking out additional debt, that's something that the Navy, Department of Navy, whether it's a member or the lease relationship, we want to kind of hold a trump card there. We want to be able to say concur, non-concur, if not approve. Something that's worked out well in the past, and we anticipate that will be needed in the future. Changes to cash flow distribution. We'll hit cash flow distribution here in a little bit. We enter into a deal, we want to know that cash flow distribution, how it's going to work. And we don't want our private partner to have the ability to come in and say, hey, let's steer some more money at fees somewhere or at returns to another entity. We want to make sure that funds are flowing within the deal and being captured for the long-term sustainment. These are not deals. The requirements is going to change over time, and we want entities set up and the relationship of those entities to wherein they can react to those changing in requirements. The one thing that we will not have, where we'll have everything that you have in your private portfolio, the one thing's a little bit different, is we can't just walk in one day and say, hey, we still got a requirement, a very high demand, but let's just sell this one off. We're coming into this not to make money from the Department of Navy, we're coming in to meet a mission, to make sure that we have the transient housing available for our folks. And you want that. It all helps us sleep well at night. So, redevelopment, dispositions, additions to assets, major work over time, we want to have a say in that. You will find that we will be very motivated to maintain a high standard of quality across the entire term, 50 years or so. Use of incentive-based fee structures. One of the things, our lessons learned right now is we didn't get that exactly right in the past. We'll be very interested in what industry has to say about incentive fees, not only as a result of this industry forum, the RFI, feedback that we get here or in writing, and I recognize a lot of you are not going to want to stand up in the QA and give away what you think is a business secret. Hopefully you'll respond to the RFI, and hopefully when we get to the RFP, RFQ, obviously you'll have more opportunity to talk about the great things you have in mind there. Periodic reports, another lesson learned. You'll find that we have annual, semi-annual, monthly, quarterly things in mind, and we're starting to see a little bit more reporting on different things than we have in the past. That will continue. I think if you are here today and you're not familiar with what we've been doing in the other parts of our portfolios, privatization, I would encourage you to talk to some of those folks. I think you will see, we are bureaucrats, but we are bureaucrats that understand this industry. I have been involved with MHPAEA since really '94 when we started putting the authorities together. We had some authorities that were special to the Navy before MHPAEA that we got in '95, and then the MHPAEA in '96. So I've been involved in a large part of my team have been involved in privatization, really going back to the '90s. All 62,000 of those family homes, the 7,000 unaccompanied. We understand the financing. We're not the folks that do that, but we understand, and we understand how we need to move in time and to work with you and to take advantage of what you can do. So if you've not worked with us in the past and that has you concerned, don't just take my words. Seek out some of those, whether it's financial partners, contractors that have worked with us, and see what they have to say. If they say bad things, they're all fibs. Payment performance bonds, corporate guarantees. Obviously, we look real hard at balance sheet before we grab onto those corporate guarantees. Payment performance bonds, Congress helped us a few years ago and actually require them now on the construction. The big thing is the out-year investment funds. We're not looking to do a great deal in the first 5 years and improve everything and then start a demolition program for the next 45 years. We absolutely want to raise the standard of quality immediately and have that standard of quality be there in 50 years when we're making a decision. Do we extend this deal or do we part ways and walk away from each other? We want that project to be self-sustained from revenue, not be dependent upon government equity or not being dependent upon interest rates being magical at some point to maintain our quality. And then again, absolutely no guarantees. You look at the locations where we're at, some of the things that we have that we can do to avoid guarantees, and I think you'll agree that we can get there with the financing on this deal without the need for guarantees. I understand you love them, who would, but they don't help us in the long term. They won't help us get a project through the Hill, through Congress. They're not needed. They create bad habits, so hopefully we can avoid talking about them. Typical project cash flows, just want to throw this up there. This may be totally different on our deal. We think it puts things in the right perspective. We want the private sector to make money on a deal we do in the future. Quite frankly, if they're not making money, it's probably not going to be a real positive deal for anyone. That said, we don't want anybody that's involved to be thinking they're going to come in and make all the money right up front and walk away. We want people to have fee structures that are equivalent to market fee structures and return structures that are in alignment with the marketplace. Hopefully patient return over time that leads to a good project. So you can see there a typical lockbox have all the room revenue coming in, paying out operating expenses, including the hotel operator fees. Maybe some of those get drug on further down in the waterfall. Some capital repair and replacement CRR, paying off some debt service annually, semi-annually, monthly, however that works. A lot of questions on financing. What's the best way to try to put the financing together for this in the future? Very interested in your input, your feedback from that. Recapitalization account deposits. This is really us putting away money that in your pure private portfolio, if you're the owner, it kind of where the everything breaks down there and that's your split, you're done with the deal. This is us saying, hey, let's put away in a lockbox, let's put away in an investment account, money to maintain, sustain these units, the lodging over the full 50 years. Some asset management fees, incentive fees, and then a distribution, which quite frankly, as Department of Navy investor, we're very interested in return on investment, but we're really most interested in that return on investment being there to maintain that quality for the entire 50 years. We do not anticipate taking out a return before the end of the 50 years. So. And I think I'm way ahead of schedule. What's the next slide? Thank you for being here. Thanks for your interest in this. I think we had about 117 folks from the private sector, a few folks that sent us back notes, said they couldn't make it, but they're very interested in RFQ, RFP. We have really this summer, the great thing about working with Secretary Spencer is he likes to get things done. The other great thing is he doesn't give you very much time to get it done. So his urgency is a word you hear often in the Pentagon today. It's taken very seriously, and it starts with him. So his expectation is that before the end of the summer, or very late summer, early fall, but we've got a project down the street, RFQ, RFP, and sometime before the end of December that we're executing the first phase of DoN lodging privatization. So a lot of work to do between now and then. Look forward to your questions. Don't hold back, whether it's today or in writing. We want to make sure that we got the best project to take advantage of what you have to offer, what you can bring to the table. And that when we put something on the street, we're not tying our hands, that we're enabling ourselves to get the best out there, to do the best for our sailors, Marines, families that are in transient, the civilians as well. great opportunity for economics. I know that the private sector doesn't show up if good economics isn't there, but also a great opportunity for doing good. And I know companies like to say, hey, here's where I'm doing good. You're not going to find a better opportunity than that here. You will be part of that creation of lethality, of having people on that wall for gardeners to make sure that we sleep better at night. And I don't have a watch on. 9:07. I think we're well ahead of schedule. We want to shorten the break a little bit. Maybe start back up at 9:30. We'll have more time for Q&A. That work? Take a break until about 9:30. Admiral Porco mentioned some of the VIPs here. Please do take an opportunity to pick different people's brains, give us input. Very interested in all the feedback. And again, thank you for being here.
Battery power.
Thank you all for coming today. Thank you very much. We're going to talk about the solicitation process. We've identified 4 steps in our solicitation process where we reach out to industry. The first one is this forum today. We thank you all for coming on the education piece. The second is a request for information. I think most everyone has seen that already. We will, also known as the RFI, you'll hear that term again, where we collaborate, you find out your interest, you find out our interest, and one of the key pieces is the other considerations that the Department of Navy just hasn't thought about yet. The third is to incorporate the feedback that we get from you on the RFI, and we start to develop an initial concept. That initial concept will go through the Department of Navy, Office of Secretary of Defense, Office of Management and Budget, and eventually receive congressional approval before we start and issue a solicitation. And then finally, we will formally seek a solicitation. We will ask for qualifications and full proposals from you that we can take forward. The RFI response format is fairly simple. We will be asking for responses to things that we have posted on the RFI by 6 May. And that's 12 days, but as Mr. Forrest mentioned, we're on a pretty aggressive schedule right now. And all that information on the RFI is on our website, and it will help you prepare the submittal. We'll get into that in a second. The RFI is structured into 4 categories. Quadrant A in the upper left you'll see is we're seeking information about your company and information regarding potential teaming. Quadrant B, we're seeking feedback on the solicitation itself, feedback on the size and other items related to the first phase that we would be doing, the time that you would need to prepare qualifications to submit a full proposal, the time expected to execute the first phase once selected, and additional information that you may need from us. Third, in Quadrant C, we're looking for information from you on how the project might be financed to best position the project for near and long-term success. And then finally, in Quadrant D, we're seeking your input on the development and management aspects of the privatization project. That would include things as establishing the full team for the development, operations and financing of the project, a vision for branding that we've discussed, issues you may foresee with potential restrictions, and we listed some of those, anti-terrorism force protection, various setbacks, security requirements that are unique to the Department of Navy that you may not experience today in your commercial properties. How you would assist in determining the appropriate number of rooms and what that inventory size should look like. And finally, your plan for retaining and transitioning current employees of the Department and the Navy into the lodging programs. Once we receive your responses to the RFI, we received approval to solicit. The concept for the first page of the lodging privatization, the next steps will be to actually issue the solicitation. We use a two-step approach that's similar to what we used in the military housing privatization initiative, and we do that because it's just a familiar process. We have found from our experience it's the most efficient method for both the industry and for the Navy to limit the upfront cost to actually prepare a proposal, as the first step is primarily a qualification submission, and to the Department of the Navy for the information in a full proposal, which is needed to make a selection, but from only those who are considered to be best qualified. We'll issue a request for qualifications, a request for proposal, RFQ, RFP, and in that RFQ, RFP will be one document divided into two parts that you see here. On the left side of the slide, you'll see the RFQ where all offers will submit their qualifications, development approach, team composition, qualifications on past performance, and financial information, including financial statements demonstrating sufficient financial strength to complete the development of the project and operations over the long term. And again, I want to stress the importance of over the long term. And then the Department of Navy will evaluate the qualification submittals based on evaluation factors stated in the RFQ, RFP, down select those best qualified offerers, which are typically limited to 4 or 5 offerers. Those down selected will be invited to submit full proposals in step 2 on the right side. And you'll see in step 2 of the RFQ, RFP, we'll ask for full development plans to include descriptions of scope of work anticipated to be completed throughout the renovation and the construction periods. And then the operations and maintenance plans, which detail how the hotels will be managed and maintained over time for the term of the business agreements. The schedule for transition, for executing those agreements, financial closings, as well as completing the initial development plans. Financial proposals, which will include the organizational structure, development, budget, sources and uses of funds, operating revenues and expenses for the entire term, and the distribution of cash flows. The DoN will then evaluate those proposals to make the best value selection of the offer it intends to enter into exclusive negotiations to work with towards the execution of the first phase. While the solicitation will be for the first phase of the entire portfolio, the solicitation will provide DoN with the option to add future phases to the project. The immediate next steps, we'll be looking forward to receiving your responses to the RFI by the 6th of May. We'll be looking forward to your input and creativity to help with the best solutions for the DoN program. We welcome your thoughts and considerations for our concept. Once we receive approval to solicit, we will look forward to receiving your proposals and moving forward with this program. And our final selection of the program, of the forum prior to launch, we will go out and tour some of the properties that we have for both the Navy and the Marine Corps, and you'll get a chance firsthand to look at what the actual properties look like based on the descriptions that we've had. From that concludes the solicitation process, and again, this is just a brief overview of it. We will go into our question and answer period now, and again, we thank you all for coming.
We have plenty of time. Come on. Yes. We have plenty of time for Q&As, and if we don't fill out the time, then I get to sing karaoke to you.
Scott, can you introduce the panel member?
Yes, I'll let them introduce themselves. Go right ahead.
Matt Brookman with the Concourse Group. We support NAPAC in their privatization efforts.
I'm Corky Vasquez, the Director of Special Venture Acquisitions. I work for Mr. Forrest, and looking for opportunities to innovate with the private sector and helping relieve some of our shortfalls in shore infrastructure.
So Matt, working with Concourse, that is our consultant, our business financial consultant for special ventures acquisition and real estate at Naval Facilities Engineering Committee. Matt actually worked with a previous consultant we had. He's done quite a few of these with me and our team. For a while, he went over to your side of the fence and actually worked some of the lodging privatization for PAL from the private sector. So he's a good asset for our team. So wide open on questions. Great. I'm running lunch. She's on the way with the microphone.
Can you describe the associates that are working at the lodging facilities currently? How many civilians, what the benefits look like, what kind of issues will be faced privatizing on current operations?
I don't have numbers ready to answer for total now. Do we have that in the fact book at all?
No, we don't have the number of employees currently.
So we had it in a version of the fact book. We took that out because we really didn't want it to be focused on government ownership operation, but what you feel needs to operate the lodging. We have a lot of great people that are running our lodging. I stayed in lodging last night. Actually, I stayed in NGIS. Is that what? Yeah, NGIS. All lodging. If I can say that without offending anybody, could I say that, Mr. Bianchi? All lodging. Great people. And we will encourage, however we do the lodging privatization, we will encourage our partner who we're doing business with to seek out those folks, and would expect that you would do so anyway, rather than trying to create a new, complete new staff to operate the hotels. You will find that on base, there will be a little bit more requirements for who your employees are and how they can get behind that fence. We don't just let everybody in, and sometimes that creates challenges for you. I know you all have challenges in the marketplace with different segments of the industry keeping good workers as the economy goes up and down. A little bit of an added challenge when you're behind the fence line. We don't want criminals running around behind the fence line and watching what we're doing. So we can and will give some total numbers in response to the RFI as we provide feedback. Good question. Did that hit most of it? Sure. Thanks. Other questions? Yes.
Guess if you want us to introduce ourselves, Jeff Bays, Brookhurst Development. Question, you mentioned a couple of times 50-year term. First part, I assume that would apply to even the LLC or ground lease structure, and then the second part of that question is, where do the 50, is that a statutory requirement, is that policy, or is that just a good idea?
It is not law, it is not policy. It is what we've learned over time with how long does the term need to be to get back out what we're trying to achieve and for the project to be financed. We'll not be surprised if this project is, initial development is over $1.5 billion. And I don't think you're going to find too many people that's willing to put $1.5 billion in there for a short-term deal. If we can do something shorter term, we'll be very interested in doing that.
How about longer term?
Longer term, you know, I don't know that we will need longer term, so it'll be interesting if people are driving for that. I haven't seen a need for that in other areas. I'm not anticipating that here.
it could be something that if it needs to be considered, we would. Yeah.
Hi, Ray Garfield with Garfield Public Private. Going from the Army lodging, as I recall, after the award of that AFEES, we ran a lot of the Army lodging at the time, filed a lawsuit on that. And so, can you tell us who operates the Navy lodging and the structure of this? When you do make an award or 2 awards, are you protecting yourself from rollback as happened in the Army lodging program?
Yeah, so I think my understanding of what happened on the Army lodging is they were part of a proposal and they filed a GAO protest. I think that got worked out. I do not anticipate that the existing owners, operators of DoN lodging, the Navy and the Marine Corps, we have 2 operators on each side, the Navy and Marine Corps, that they will be proposing as part of someone's team or separately. So don't anticipate that being the case here. Question?
Hi, Karen Johnson, Pinnacle Advisory Group. When a sailor or Marine travels now, how does he make a reservation? Does he go through a central Navy portal on the internet, or is it totally freestyle?
I wouldn't call it freestyle. There's currently a defense travel system. It kind of depends on, we saw the types of travelers that we had. Some are on group orders that go as a unit, as part of a command. So there's a couple of different ways to do that. The actual reservation process is worked out, I think, through each of the individual organizations for the NGIS and into the Marine Corps, etc., for making reservations. But most of the official travelers go through the defense travel system to make reservations for lodging. And then if they're going to a location that has a government-provided lodging facility, they'll go through that.
And is there something that is required, like a certificate of non-availability or state of non-availability, if there is lodging on base and it does have rooms available?
Yes.
Okay. And how easy or hard is it to get at that information for the right sizing project?
I think we'll have that as part of the proposals.
And they're paying for their lodging with a Navy-issued credit card, or how does that work?
To the best of my knowledge, it's all through government-issued travel cards.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think you will find that your majority of your tenants, your demand, they work for a client who is pretty good at paying their bills on time. They have a pretty good credit rating. It's not, they do have to have certain behavior standards, so it may be a little bit of a different mix of guests and their ability to pay than you have in the rest of your portfolios. Go ahead, front row. Talk real loud. You are welcome to say who you are and who you work with, particularly if you want other people to know that you're out there and interested in wanting to team, or you can just ask your question, either way you want to do it. Yes, sir.
Bill Anderson with AECOM. Have all or most of the properties already gone through a condition assessment, or is that going to be a step that's needed?
So yes, no, maybe, and I'm guessing you might be interested in government contracts. We're working with the private sector if they're going to be doing that. They have had different surveys over time for different purposes. So we collected what folks had, the 4 owners operators. It was not put together with the concept of privatizing going forward. It was not put together with a concept of would we like to brand going forward if we pursue privatization. So it's a little bit different than what we would expect. I do not believe that our first phase of privatization that we will have detailed phase 1, phase 2, perfect knowledge on all the assets that we want to include in that phase.
There will be, at a minimum, a portion of the assets where we have detailed information that people are basing all their fee structures, their cash flows, sources and uses, all those things that you need to put a proposal in, that they're basing that on something real, that when we execute the first phase, we can have some level of financial closure and operation and moving out on initial development, and in all likelihood using some placeholders for some of the other information, and then the partnership, private sector going forward can refine that data going forward. Perfect place, we would take 4 years, 5 years to put this together. Perfect place depending on what viewpoint you are, right? You don't want to do that either in the private sector. And you would collect all that information to get it perfect before you put something on the street. So we'll in all likelihood have a hybrid. And you will see lots of questions on that in the RFI. Don't hold back, let us know your opinions. We'll wade through all of them. And our goal is to put together something that not only meets our mission requirements and those of the folks that NAVPAC is working for here, but to take advantage of what you can bring to the table, the private sector, not to tie your hands where we have no business tying your hands. So that's our goal. One of the things that Corky doesn't mention that we've been talking about is we are going to try to put into the schedule as we're going through the hill and get the approvals necessary, a step wherein we can release a draft RFQ, RFP. You're learning a lot today where we might be going with the RFQ, RFP. But if possible, I'd like to release a draft to give people an opportunity to look at the solicitation document, provide us feedback that we may or may not be able to utilize depending on what we're trying to do. But to get your input. Your input is very important to us. We don't do these to check a box. We learned from the very start of working privatization, enhanced use leasing, real estate deals, you got to listen to your folks. You're the one that's actually doing the work in the end. So, good question. Thank you. Rick.
Yeah, Rick Taylor with Golf Community Investments. Two parts of that question. I see that the average age of the assets is circa 1969. I'm wondering if any of the properties qualify as historic properties. And then the second part is, obviously for all interested parties, I was wondering if on the heels of what you just said, Scott, are you planning for structured visits for all of the assets for all of the interested parties, or just for shortlisted proponents?
So let's talk about historical assets first. There is significant number that are eligible for historic. There are some that are on historic list in historic areas. All that information will be in the RFQ, RFP. We work closely with SHPO. It's a little bit different process when we privatize, wherein the private sector gets to work with SHPO, usually in concert with the services. Works well. How much will we have access to in the RFQ, RFP? Not defined yet. As Corky mentioned when he was talking about our two-step non-FAR acquisition process, we heard from you guys long ago, don't spend my money unwisely. It's my resources. Don't just ask for things when you don't really need them. Don't ask me to go spend my labor, spend my dollars, if you really don't need that information yet to make the decision you need to make. So we do take that very serious. We put the things in the RFQ that we need to be to evaluate qualifications and making sure that we're moving the right group forward, and to put everything else in the proposal stage, or even during exclusive negotiations where we have what we need to have to make the decision at that stage. So we'll be surprised if we have a lot of research. There'll be some availability in the RFQ. The RFP, that'll open up significantly.
Thanks, Scott. Greg Johnson, Square Bed Cost. I see a couple of websites for questions.
Do you plan to build a document loan with regard to these properties? And do you have a schedule when that might be available to interested parties?
Don't have a schedule. Will either be a room or a site when we get to RFQ, RFP with loads of data. We used to use rooms. I suspect that's old-fashioned now with technology. There's probably a better way to do that. I don't believe, given the schedule that we're on, that we're going to have detail on every site in the first phase. I'll be very surprised if we have that. It will be a significant amount of the assets to where folks, both in the private sector and us evaluating the proposal, have a good representative sample to know what we're going forward with.
One follow-up question, Craig Arthur again. Your reimbursement on the per diem, you showed an ADR of about 138 for 2019 and a 75% reimbursement. So as a potential owner, you renovate a hotel, you build a new hotel, you can get $150 ADR. Is the max the 107, the 70% of the 138? How are you guys going to account for that?
Yeah, so the way we're setting that number is we want to make sure that we're setting that number appropriate to be able to handle the initial sources and uses that we need to establish the quality level where we want it and the branding, and to maintain that over the 50 years. And we don't want to have that rate be more than what's required to do so. Obviously, we won't want to take undue risk, and we don't want to have it to be so conservative that we're spending government tax dollars where they don't need to be spent. We believe on the modeling that we have now, and we've thrown out a lot of data to you in the fact book. You're welcome to provide us feedback in response to the RFI. We encourage that. But we believe that our modeling, that it doesn't need to be higher than that 75%. We believe that that works. We believe that it growing with inflation works. We've seen that work in other locations. It is a completely different model, as you know, on privatization and what we're investing. We're investing a lot of value with this, with the land, with the, in a lot of cases, the improvements on that land mentioned vastly different ages of the building. So there is a lot of stuff. There'll be some money spent on branding, but it is in very good shape today. And there's a different model. Your taxation is going to be different on this privatization. No one's going to tax you on the land. Different states are going to have different ways that they can come in for taxing the improvements on that land. And different states have reserved different rights there. You'll see the government, for the most part, in all likelihood, will stay out of tax issues between the private sector and the state and local governments. We do so to make sure it doesn't look like the Department of the Navy, DoD, is being heavy-handed as federal with states. There are times that we come in and play, but we make it very clear that we're not representing the private sector. That we're representing the federal government's interest, the Department of Navy's interest. So there are differences that come into play. I would encourage all to at least just do an executive level sources and uses, perform take a look at it. I think you'll find that it will work with the 75%. But if you have big concerns that we need to look, that's what we're looking for, input. Is it feasible? What are the things you would do to make it work best, to make it work best for all involved and to meet our mission? Recognizing we're not just investing to make money. We're investing this to provide a mission.
And is your guest out of pocket 25% each night? Is that what the reimbursement is?
I'm not sure I understand that question.
Yeah, I think what was shown was the per diem, and that was the 136, I think it was. That's the average per diem. Those are the rates that are set by GSA, and that's prescribed there. The 102, that's 75% of that per diem. So we are estimating that the average daily rates for the hotels across the country would be at the 102. The travelers themselves would not be out of pocket. It's not reimbursing 75%. It's those actual average daily rates would be 75% of per diem.
Chris Moriarty, Steeple. Scott, after privatization, are you still going to have BOQ/BEQ transient barracks on base, which could potentially compete with lodging on base? That's my first question. Second is, you mentioned potentially in the right sizing process that you could have something that's good, the highest best use, perhaps not as lodging, but unaccompanied housing. If that's the case, would it stay in the portfolio with the BH as the revenue source?
So we do have, a few folks that are looking at unaccompanied housing opportunities. Those have not come up to the echelon 2 with Navy, Marine Corps, with CNSE, MCICOM, or NAVFAC. We do recognize that in order to attract the financing, in order to put a good deal in place, we can't have something where the government is going to be competing back or controlling what demand that you can create by the value you're providing and the quality you're providing. When you look at our unaccompanied, it is a different marketplace. Those time frames, whether they're 2 days to 120 or up to 180 days, our unaccompanied housing is longer term, folks. So we will be mindful of that. We'll watch. We'll make sure that we're not setting something up where we're really controlling your destiny and the success of the lodging privatization by moving folks around on unaccompanied barracks and making it look like lodging again, transient lodging, if you will. We do have some interesting circumstances, and we're still kind of working through it, particularly on the Navy side. They have situations where they take things in and out of unaccompanied, if you will, barracks, if you're familiar with the Army, to the transient lodging side. So we are looking at that. The Navy, like all the services, we're moving to one provider under non-appropriated. So we're talking to them, what was your solution as you moved in that direction? You know, could you have moved back and forth? How could you do that? And how can we bring that into play? I'm not sure we can. I'm not sure we can. And one of the other challenges that we're looking at is the Marine Corps has actually had supplements their NWR out of revenue from predominantly the end of the Corps to the tune of in the years past $3 to $6 million. They're looking to increase that annually. MWR does a lot of great things for those that are allowing us to sleep well, and so they've asked us to take a look at that. How can we make that happen? So we're doing so. I'm not sure how that'll play out in the future. And then the other big issue that we're doing is whatever we do in a DoN lodging privatization cannot leave what we're not privatizing, and hopefully that will be just that's located on foreign land. But it can't shipwreck it. It can't make it worse. So how we do that, how we make sure that we don't fix one area and bring another area down, we've committed that we'll work on that and get through it. Don't know how that's going to play out, but it's one of the challenges we have. You probably noticed that we are just doing CONUS and Hawaii, Guam. The Military Housing Privatization Initiative authorities do not apply to foreign soil, even if they did, with all the SOFA agreements or so forth. It is probably something that we would look at as a last phase regardless. So not in play at this time. Good question, Chris.
Paul Novak with Whitman Peterson. Two items. Clarification on the average daily rate. If it's 102, which is a function of 75% of the per diem, no matter how much money you put into the asset, you're not going to be able to charge any more than that 102 other than for the inflationary effect on the per diem. So I want to make sure I understand that. So whatever you put in, you're not going to be able to generate additional revenue through rate, so you'd have to get it presumably through improved occupancy and more efficiency in renting. So that's the first thing. The second thing, I thought I read in some of the documents that there's an estimated $600 million of structural, mechanical, capital needs for the 21,000 rooms. Is that a fairly accurate number, and does that number include anything to account for upgrading the quality of the facilities?
So I think the number will go up. It's accurate for what we know today, but I do believe the number will go up, in particular with training. So, when we get to that stage where we're getting feedback, fully expect it to go up. Back to your first question, in regards to you really can't raise additional revenue by spending more sources in additional development period. True, you can significantly affect your occupancy and your demand. There are ways for civilians to avoid staying in lodging today. And as we create branding, as we raise that level of quality, I believe that there will be a higher capture rate therein. There's no guarantees, so the private sector will have to maintain a certain level of guarantee of quality to attract that demand set. A little different model than what you're used to with your pure private, but there are different advantages than your pure private. And when that economy's bad and this one's performing, trucking right along, and at $102 with inflation is providing great fees and great income. These projects are performing well. You're paying your bonds or your bank financing. People are collecting fees, and everybody's happy. And that thing out there in the private sector that's struggling with the down market, or whatever the case may be, unlimited ADR, but ain't cranking in the money that we need right now. So, just different models there.
As a follow-up to that question, GSA sets the median rates. Obviously, when we're building a financial model, we're going to want to have some degree of certainty on revenue growth over time. I doubt that any of us have any real visibility of how GSA goes about doing that. So are you going to provide us with guidance on what we can anticipate in terms of revenue growth over 50 years?
Yeah, we're learning about, we did spend a lot of time, good question, Red. We spent a lot of time on basic allowance for housing. If you all recall, when we moved into privatization of housing, we were moving from BAQ, VHA, basic allowance for quarters, and variable housing allowance that had an out-of-pocket built in, to basic allowance for housing with the 0% out-of-pocket initiative. And so we spent a lot of time back then understanding and conveying to folks how that black box of rate setting occurs. And we conveyed that to the private sector. There was interest not only in our owners or partners, but there was interest in people that were doing the rating of the bonds, the insurance of the bonds, the folks that were doing the financing. We had the majority of the financing was bond financing, some bank. And so everyone was interested in that. What is this thing called BAH? How does it work? And so what it showed is it pretty much tracked with the marketplace, with inflation. It just lagged about a year or a year and a half. But it pretty much tracked. And if you took it in swaths of 2 or 3 years, it really mimicked the private sector, right? as long as you don't have anybody stick their finger in there and mess with it. And so that's what's really good about the black box, is that's what it's intended to do. So we're now investigating how does that look for the lodging piece of the per diem, and how confident we are that it's going to track with inflation. Which if it tracks with inflation, even if you're starting at $102 ADR, or reduced ADR, if it tracks with inflation, works for sources and uses today, and your projections are it works for sustainment throughout the 50 years, if it tracks with inflation, it should work, right? So that's what we're looking at, and I think the biggest risk we have is, does someone in the future stick their finger in it, kind of like they did with the Bob, with the 1% initiative over the past 5 years, and that right now is fixed, even on the family housing side. So I think it's the biggest risk.
Yeah. My second question was, our experience with MHPAEA is property taxes can make or break, any pro forma. And we've had a mixed bag in our experiences with different municipalities with MHPAEA. I would anticipate something similar here, unless you have a different view on the applicability of property taxes.
Yes. My answer to that is yes. We, in the past, and I haven't went through this with the political appointees, but we've had a lot of guidance from our political appointee structure on how we engaged on that. It's a delicate conversation, as you know, you were involved in it. So we have to be careful what we're doing that and make sure that we're being fair. And I think for the most part, the private sector, a few places where it didn't work out too well. But for the most part, I think that we're being treated fairly by the states and localities. There's a lot of different things on the Lodging United Company that are in place, that are special programs that are different than the tax laws that exist. So, it's a good point, though. Some of the arguments, if you're on base, obviously, one of your arguments against paying full property taxes is if you're on base, you're being taken care of by the base fire department, their EMS, their police. Not going to have circumstances where the fire trucks coming in from the local community. They do agreements to back each other up, but it's not first responders, right? You're not paying the same taxes, they're not paying for the roads that are serving your hotel inside the base installation. There is a lot of differences there that you, our private sector partner or lessor, will have to take into account when you're having those discussions to remind the state and localities. And a lot of times, the state and localities do, for the most part, want us to be where we're at. So a lot of good to offer with having that installation there. So for the most part, they want to treat us fairly. We had one over here.
Matt Michalowski with PIMCO. What operational advantages do you see? I think you touched on it in the same vein, some of those advantages. But I'm curious, your property taxes being run on the operational side, whether there's occupancy tax or even looking into some of the expenses like utilities, do you anticipate there would be any advantages with the partnership? And then the second half of that question, related to tax, would be, do you think any of these would qualify for opportunities and benefits in terms of deferment of capital gains for dollars that get invested?
Yeah, the last question. Lots of different programs out there. There's only been a few of them taken advantage of in our privatization. A lot of folks will look at those different programs and is it a federal government double dipping in some manner? I'm not sure that we've taken advantage of everything that we could out there. For the most part, the thing we've taken care of, advantage of most is historic tax credits, and we've not even done that much. So operationally, other things that will come into play, utility rates, some utility rates, we'll have some moaning and groaning here from
from our existing partners. Sometimes our utility rates are higher than the municipality because we're buying from someone, running it through a base installation, and delivering it somewhere. Sometimes our rates are higher. Oftentimes with electricity, it is lower for you as a buyer because you're buying off the backs of the federal government's volume buying and what regulations we have in place. So that varies. It can be an operational benefit or a negative. The same can be said for the fire and police, the taxes. It can move different ways. In some places, it will create more different and higher operating expenses. In some places, it will generate lower operating expenses. What else is out there, Matt, on the operational side in regards to the private sector?
We think the rest of it will operate very similar to the commercial side of it. I think the fire and police and the utilities are the biggest differences that you'll see. The room tax, I heard you mention the room tax, we expect that will be applicable, even though it is on installations. And from the private sector standpoint, that's going to be a pass-through expense to you, but it will be applicable, so include that in your models.
So the other is, just one more on that, I think we've hit on it quite a bit, is your creation of demand is different here than your other portfolio. And if you're knocking it out of the park, and you are no doubt adding to the number of people that are a card-carrying member of your rewards program, and if you're knocking it out of the park and doing that, you're increasing volume in the rest of your portfolio. And that has to be taken into account in how you can propose and what your operational is overall. I can't imagine that there's not huge benefits of that, though. If it's not, then it seems we're missing some opportunity there.
Hi, from PM. Hi, from PMM Companies from Washington, D.C. area. Our company provides the contracted housekeeping services for NGIS locations in Washington, D.C. and Walter Reed campus in Bethesda. Our interest and goal in this solicitation is to obtain exposure to final bidders for this solicitation with respect to partnering, possibly for a very big operational expense, which would be housekeeping. Because of our past performance, how would you recommend us reaching out to bidders of this solicitation? Will there be another maybe venue where people can meet in team, or any suggestions? When we respond to the RFI, that's going to be the information that we put in there, that we'd like to team and partner with the major bidders for the housekeeping services. So just wanted to get some information.
So in the early stages of the RFI, we actually had some discussion questions on, did you want your name, your company's name, to be made public? I hope we didn't take that out. Did we leave that in? Okay. So there's the opportunity. We knew from doing these in the past that there would be some companies that said, hey, I really don't even want my name on the tag. You know, I don't want people to know that I'm putting the best team in the world together to come after this. And there was others that said, hey, I've got a really good product to offer. Can you at least let the other folks know at the venue that I'm out here and I do have a good product? So take advantage of that. I'm sure that we will have a pre-proposal conference if we get through a concept, get through the hill, and go on the street with a solicitation. There'll be a pre-proposal conference, another opportunity to be handing out business cards. Our goal is to have the best team working this, and we do recognize that it is a team. We have not locked in on who we want our relationship to be direct. I believe that it's traditional owners, developers, and for others to be contract relationship to the entity. We're not locked in on that. But you'll see when we get to that qualification stage, we're going to be looking at, do you have all the bases covered And how you're covering those bases, are you assuring us that that's going to be covered long-term? We're not interested in having the best company, the best people, specific people, to get us through negotiations, and then we got a different team that comes in behind them. We want the right team to take care of the Navy and the Marine Corps over the long term, across all the areas that's needed, the ownership, the development, the financing, the hotelier, the maintenance, the changing of the beds, everything that's covered. Even the third party, you'll see that we often use third party consulting architects to do inspections, making sure that we have quality across the board. It pays off over time. It pays off for you, it pays off for the company. It ensures that we meet the mission that we're investing to do so. Somebody up front, yes.
Henry Patel with Hewitt. Do you have any further insights you can share with respect to the 1.7 million nights that are being spent outside of the DoN lodging portfolio, qualitative or quantitative, to get an understanding of why they're spending those nights outside of the portfolio, what the average rate has been, get insight on that.
I'm going to let Matt take the first part of that, why I think of how I want to answer with my boss sitting over there. Jim mentioned earlier I hadn't stayed in an NDIS or a lodge in a long time, and I traveled quite a bit. So I'll let Matt go first.
One reason would be, while the occupancy is at 62%, there are peaks, especially when there's training going on. There's going to be some months that are much higher. And sometimes it's just because of the factor that there's no room in the hotels that are on base. There are various factors that the civilian, government civilian travelers may choose to stay off base. There's, it may be that they have while they're going to that installation, their primary functions are going to be off base. Sometimes they just choose because they'd rather get the reward points and keep going with their preferred lodging park vendor that they go to most often, whether they travel with personal reasons or business reasons. So I think there's a lot of information out there, some of which we're still gathering, and I think that number could be higher than that. So that, some of them aren't captured in those certificates of non-availability.
Yeah, so today, military have more strict rules on having to stay in government housing than civilians. There are a few locations where civilians absolutely have no choice and flexibility, and there are locations where they have flexibility. And there's things that you can do to make sure you're going to get an unavailability number rather than staying somewhere. I believe that we need to be careful where we go with that in the future and what we do to create demand. I am convinced that things that look like guarantees tear quality down. If I give you a guarantee and make sure someone's going to show up there, regardless of how good you're maintaining, regardless of whether you're friendly when I check you in, regardless if you're cleaning up the outdoor space, the hallway, then we're going to have a shipwreck. So if we're getting to the right level of quality, we won't have to turn the screws down on people's flexibility. They will want to stay there. And that's your goal, is for me to want to stay there. For every military person, every government person, whether they're traveling while they're on government orders, or they just happen to be on vacation in that area, that they're saying, I want to stay there. So, yeah.
Just to clarify for people who aren't familiar with the travel system, currently the vast majority of the rooms are government quarters. When they are privatized, they are not government quarters. Just want to confirm that's the expectation that you have as part of the plan.
Following up on this gentleman's question here, regarding the economics surrounding the property in the private sector, usually the market sets demand. Here, the DoD has a tremendous influence over that. recognizing you cannot provide any guarantees on occupancy. 50 years is a long span. What happens if, when, say, there's a partial closure of a base or full closure? Are there any mechanisms to assure that the debt will go into default or to make the operator whole?
Yeah, so we will not be in a situation where we're making an operator whole. We're going to be in business with the operator, right? Their success is our success, their failure is our failure. So the great thing about doing business with the Navy and Marine Corps versus the Army and the Air Force, two great services, is we're in pretty nice locations. There's very few locations that we have. They're not very, very attractive. So we have had BRAC hit, both closures and realignments, our family housing side. And I will say all but for one very small project, it's been kind of a celebration for us running the business. We actually came out better. So we will work with who we're doing business with on how we would sell off the asset if there's a complete closure or a major realignment. It's not something that on a couple of the BRACs that hit in the past with the privatized asset, the community got all excited and said, hey, we're going to now own all this. Oh no, we got it encumbered for 50 years. You can take it back if you want, but all you got is a tax bill, right? It's encumbered for 50 years. And we may or may not want to sell off with you. We may want to stay in that business because we're still making money on it. For the most part, it ends up being short-term blips, given where we're at with the Navy and Marine Corps. And long-term, it works out well. It's another of the reasons that we like to do large, diverse projects, just like your private portfolio where you have the good and the bad. It helps you overcome some of those things. But if we privatized lodging here in San Diego and you had a realignment of some sort, do you end up with whatever the San Diego equivalent is of the 102 ADR once we're opening up the doors to other people to be lodged? I don't think so. I think the rate just went up. So it is one of the advantages of where we're at. Go back to that slide 13. There's not very many of those locations where you're out in the middle of nowhere. Mark can't say that for all of his Army bases. Yeah. Good question, though.
Good morning. As a direct follow-up back to your previous statement, what, if any, opportunities are there to open up the room inventory to service members traveling for leisure, also private civilians traveling for leisure, and if that's possible, will the rate ceiling be lifted for those guests?
Something that we're in discussions on right now is for both on-base and those assets that are off-base. What do we want the waterfall to look like? And at what point in the waterfall does the restrictions on income turn off? So we'll see where that goes. I can tell you that today those restrictions on our privatization turn off on the folks that are, regardless of their affiliation, that they're no longer there because the government told them to be there. So for that retiree, for me staying there because I'm on my leisure, it would turn off, and I suspect it will be that situation here. And it does help us create additional demand, that's valuable demand for us, whether on base or off base. The difference is on base, off base. How far do we go towards unaffiliated, completely unaffiliated civilian off base? That's something that we have to work through. Pretty much on base, it's going to be people who are on orders. At some point, we'll have a cutoff on people, not sure how far to go, that they have a CAC or ability to be on that base. Whether it's families that live on base and want to have an extended family stay while they're visiting, so forth. Still got to get through those details. We have to take care of those that are on orders and the military, and then the civilian that are on orders regardless of what type they are. That's the first demand that we need to take care of. Things after that are a win-win for the business that we're running and for those people that are working with us. So, great question.
Assuming that the Navy's position is to require all the units to have enforced terrorism protection that are newly constructed, whether they're on base or off base, what's the position on the substantial rehab portfolio that requires $600 million worth of diverting, and will that affect the economic?
Yeah, the ATFP, the Anti-Terrorism Force Protection, as you might imagine, it just got, it's grown over time. If you go back 30 years ago, ATFP, once you were behind the fence line, didn't really come into play. It does now. ATFP comes into play even if we're leasing something, if we're more than 25% of the space, ATFP comes into play. It is not as onerous, and I wouldn't want it to scare people as some might suspect. Over time, the standards in the private sector have increased. Probably the biggest thing that comes into play is if you're mid-rise tower, high-rise tower, progressive collapse comes into play. I don't know how much of that private sector was a pretty big gap between ATFP and pure private sector in the past. ATFP, there's different standards whether you're on base or you're off base. There are different standards that standards kick in at certain amounts of dollars, rehab percentages of money you're spending. It is something I don't anticipate it'll be waived. We can make it work. If you go by the big hole at Broadway, the 8 blocks that are getting started there, in the middle of that will be the new regional headquarters for Southwest region of CNIC, and the ATFP standards are being incorporated into that building. That will look like part of San Diego when we're done. So, more on that when we get to RFQ, RFP, but we'll come into play. Good question. I'm getting ready to break out, so.
Cash flow waterfall a bit in terms of fees and required reserves with Marriott.
So the fees, that'll be something that'll be in the proposal. We're going to ask you as you submit your offer to propose what the fees would be, and we expect there will be different levels. We expect, similar to our housing deals, that a portion of those fees would be on an incentive basis. In terms of the required reserves, that's something that we value greatly in terms of being able to take care of all of the rooms, all of the assets for the entire term of the project of 50 years. And I think it was mentioned in one of the presentations that we want these to be self-sustaining, so we would expect that there'd be a couple of different levels of those reserves. The capital repair and replacement account, something similar to that you'd expect in your private market hotels. A lot of times they're required by the lending community. Something that we set up, it's been called different things, but it might be a project recapitalization account. But that's something that any of the renovations that are necessary throughout the term, and we know that it's not going to be estimated perfectly. You're not going to be able to project that. But on a typical basis, how much is it going to take to reinvest in these units past the initial development period? And we'll set up some reserve, and again, where that reserve is located in the waterfall will be part of your proposal. But that's what that account will be intended for. In some of our projects, we've had an additional account at the very bottom of the waterfall. Once all of the operating expenses and debt service, all fees have been paid, as well as that initial reserve accounts funded, that there be an additional split that would be the return to the private entity, the invested equity, and an additional split to a reserve account, whether it's a savings account or something separate. So just to kind of wrap up that return, and it's not the Navy's return, but it would allow for additional investment over and above what's expected from projects with capitalization account.
You will not see us dictate anything in regards to the waterfall. You'll hear us talking about patient returns, not over leveraging, skin in the game, those type of things. We're looking for folks to work with us that are really interested and focused on being able to maintain that quality standard of products and services delivered over the entire term of the deal. And that waterfall can very much reflect how committed folks are to that.
Have you given any thought to handback requirements, minimum useful life, what things might need to look like at the end of the deal?
In regards to unwind at year 50?
Yes.
Yeah, so for the most part, it will be an abandoned in place, or if we have reserve accounts and want to take things down, it would be taken down. It is a 50-year lease on the land. There may be some assets that if we demo and come back with replacement lodging, there may be situations where we say, hey, let's put that off base, and so there may be private land that comes into play, and so that could be unwound differently and sold off as assets of the limited liability company or with a lease payment percentage that's coming back into play. So there is lots of different options. Do not anticipate that the government's going to buy out back on assets at the end of the 50 years. If we go that direction, then we'll look for you to write us a really, really big check to buy in at the front end. And as we know, that's not going to work that way to achieve what we're wanting to achieve at 100 to 80 yards, right? Yes. Yeah.
I assume that you have some idea of the value of these assets and have some idea of what value, what basis you would place these assets into a venture or look to have them producing a return through the lease. I'm assuming you're not valuing the assets at zero.
We are valuing the assets in regards to what's the value produced by the revenue that we're capping. What do we expect that the room nights to be? What is the revenue that we're capping? And that in turn is really creating the value of the asset. To value it on real estate or to value it at less than that, I think is overly conservative or overly liberal, one or the other. And it won't play well into the financing. So.
Would you value the assets today at its current revenue stream in cap?
No, I value it at a future revenue stream. I do expect that we will have growth in room nights at a lot of locations. And there will be some assets that we're just taking down and not replacing. So I would, and I'll be very surprised if when we get to proposals, if folks are not valuing on projecting in regards to financing and what they can accomplish there.
Hi, Adrienne Jubb with Marriott. Can you explain if any food and beverage, catering, meeting space exists at any of the hotels today, and if you see any of that changing?
So we have some out there that are going to be really interesting discussion points. In the MHPAEA, there is specific law laid out on how we deal with that. The Secretary is the ultimate decision maker. What we're trying to do is, what we're leaning towards is where the Navy or Marine Corps is in with their non-appropriated folks, running the mini mart, selling the dry goods, whatever, that we stay that process. What we'll be interested in the private sector is what is traditionally done with the brand that you're proposing. And we're not sure that we want to interfere with your brand. If you do certain things, and the value of the brand is you can expect that everywhere you go, then we'll probably be very interested in how do we best deal with that going forward with you if you're successful. We have some interesting places in Monterey. We have a terrific historic old hotel that someone reminded me a couple weeks ago that the whole basement of the thing is really the cafeteria for the entire base. So how do we deal with those? We've got to figure that out. Don't have an answer for you today, but I'm sure that we'll have a broad spectrum of things that we'll have to figure out how we best deal with it. So we make that work. We've had a lot of different solutions that we've incorporated on the family and unaccompanied side. Kind of run the gamut, and it's worked out well, and ended up being a win-win. There is money that's produced for MWR with these type of operations. At a minimum, we'll try to stick to where we're doing that unless we are directed to do other ones. One more question, and then we'll wrap up. Who's got a question? Take both of you. Go quick.
Real quick, Scott. The bottom line, you're trying to get 62% up to site. Do you consider a referral system like a college store? Guarantee that should probably not be a guarantee, just a referral system on a first occupancy basis. In other words, to whoever's going to go to that base, boom, they're going to stay there until it's full. Then they can go to the market.
Yeah, I think you'll see a variation of that regardless, in regards to military and civilian.
Because that's really to get people interested in the financings to be done at lower cost of capital, rating agencies giving a better rating, and you to have a bigger recap account at the end of the day to do your future renovations. The referral system, I think, you don't have one of these scoring.
Yeah, and I don't want to call it a referral system, just the way you do your orders and how things come into play. Theirs is probably better than a referral system. Okay. We say that. And you know, we to be a pioneer, to be the first of, become winner and back with lots of arrows. The advantage we have over the Army is they were the pioneers. They took a bunch of arrows for us. That, trust me, we are looking very hard at what their lessons learned and making sure that we take less arrows as a result going forward. So I think you'll find it's better than a referral. We'll make sure that we describe that well so it plays well with the finances going forward. Chris, you're the last one.
Yeah, thank you. Do you have legislative authority to go ahead with privatization such we're not going to run into all these white rules on the debt?
So we do have authorities. If you all ever heard the term scoring, there's two parts of scoring. There's scoring that's done on legislation that the committees have to take into account what they're doing to Treasury by passing laws. And there's year of execution scoring that Office of Management and Budget does to make sure when I sign a big deal that it really doesn't cost the government billions next year, the year after, the year after, the year after. So in the past, we knew exactly what those scoring rules were. They've made them harder, and it is a big reason for the process of getting approvals and getting RFQ, RFP on the street, and probably no earlier than August, is working through that process. What we found is, we got some work to do with O&B, by the way. But what we found is going through O&B before we do that first congressional notification, it's really setting the stage for the second trip through that process when we're ready to execute and close a deal. 2 times we had to go through before we put some on the street, before we can close. And so we get the rules set in the first trip through. Second trip should be a no-brainer going through. Work to do. Secretary Spencer's committed to going up to O&B with us to make sure that to get what we need to get. Don't expect that the laws will be changed to take O&B out of the picture or CBO. I have opinions on that, but I don't expect that to be the case.
Hey, so first and foremost, very great questions, and I know some of y'all probably have a lot that you thought of but didn't ask. So let me, you're here because really you're the industry experts. We have a lot of different corporations that have done this. I always tell this to our folks is that we should be less certain of things we think we know. Okay? We should be less certain of things that we think we know. And I say that because there's a lot of things that we don't know that we're sort of relying on you to know to sort of help in this journey of privatization, of lodging privatization. So I would offer a few things for you to consider. May 6th was sort of the suspense date for these RFIs. So let me give you sort of some sound bites of what I think an RFI would help. It's not just a question. What about this? How about if you tell us what you need? How about if you tell us what we should consider? And how about if you also tell us where your concerns are? And the reason I ask that is because that's going to really help us shape and understand, where we need to head and in what direction as we sort of prepare this draft RFP. Okay, and that would be helpful because I sort of envision that a briefing to the Secretariat that says, hey, what does industry say? And I don't want to come up with, hey, here's all the questions they ask. I want to sort of present, hey, here's what they're telling us. Here's things that they need, sir. Here's things that we should consider. And here are still some of the concerns based on what you learned today, what you asked from one another. Once we have this draft RFP, which I think is a very good thing to do, we're doing this in a lot of our acquisition strategies now, inviting industry in early before any solicitation goes on the street, so we can sort of provide something that what we consider is biddable, right? And a lot of times it sort of saves the time for asking a lot of RFIs, because there's a correlation that the more questions people have when something goes out, the higher the probability that it won't achieve its desired end state. And then based on the RFPs, we will come back and maybe have another gathering to sort of talk about it as well. Time is very critical, okay, but making sure we do this right is just as important because there is a lot of complexities based on the questions that I was hearing on ATMP or the waterfall, who gets entitlements of this or that. So those are very critical things that we need to make sure there's a very comprehensive understanding of our business. And I think you want to make sure that you understand that. And so again, I want to thank the panel members for spending the time with you. I want to thank everyone for participating. I also want to thank our distinguished guests that are here. Someone had to depart. But again, this is a very good opportunity that we have here. We look forward to our journey together. And Scott, I'll turn it back over to you because I got jobs. But again, thank you very much.
I'd just like to point out on the screen there's a website. If you have any other questions, please put them, send them to that website. We'll be happy to answer them as best we can.
Hey, Teresa, you want to come up and talk about where to be for buses and so forth? Come on up, come on up, come on up. Hey, while she's coming up here, I want to thank you all for being interested in this. Look forward to working with you. As the Chief mentioned, do look forward to to your input. It's about you, not about us. What do we need? What do we need to do to make this work for you, to make you be able to try your stuff?